In my 20s, I created a tool called Rubber Hose. It hid sensitive information beneath layers and layers of fake data. WikiLeaks is based on the same idea.
One of the exciting things to work on with Mark Tilsley, the designer, was figuring out a way in a movie where people are communicating so much online to make that visual.
We've been talking about making a story that's very much in the heads, the minds, the screens, the typography, the sort of, to try and make that cinematic. It has a message and a story to tell, and you know, with the way the camera's working and the way the sets are designed, we're trying to give it a sort of reality. But we're also trying to make it cinematic, and that's always a difficult balance when you want truth.
When I'd first gotten involved with the script, I knew I wanted to have one bold idea that told you pretty quickly that this was not a documentary. So I kind of developed this idea of the submission platform, that we would actually visualize the technology that Julian spent a couple of decades developing, you know, and show how it's possible in the world of WikiLeaks that if you had something you wanted to share, that you could feel entirely secure in the knowledge that you could send it to them and no one would ever know where it came from.
So we have a set called the Submission Platform, which is basically, in a nutshell, is describing how you can send your information into WikiLeaks. But the way Julian sees it is through his mind. So we've been thinking about that idea for quite a while and how to perceive it.
It really started with Bill, like, what if it's like Julian's fantasy office? And, you know, and we started talking about what if it's something like The Office in the Apartment, you know, that great movie, The Apartment, like with all the desks going on to infinity forever.
My idea had always been that it's kind of Julian's idealized version of what a newsroom should be. It's like journalism at its best, so that it has elements of the front page. It has sort of nostalgic elements, you know, War of All the President's Men, frankly. But it also isn't real, you know, it is a projection, and that was Mark Tilsley's great inspiration.
We've been reading Julian's book and his life as a young child and his fascination with nature and the fact that he loved to be on the beach. And then we were sort of thinking that it's very interesting for us as set filmmakers to make that something unusual and different. So we looked at Kubrick's 2001, you know, that last bedroom, which is a sort of Baroque furniture bedroom on a glass floor, and it's just extraordinary. You go through this world and end up there.
In his reading on Assange, Assange's memories of childhood, great Australian beaches and things like that, his idea was, well, let's put it on sand. Let's have that one element that just seems out of place. It was kind of an immediate, oh my God, that's great. And then a little like, ooh, is it really? And then the more we explored it, the more solid it seemed.
This is Julian's sort of invention, and on the beach there are 500 people working at desks with lamps above them on simple computers and lots of paper, documents flying in. So you get this impression of how all this stuff comes in, how it's gathered. It's quite an interesting concept. I might not explain that properly, but that's been really fun, and that's sort of central to our world, is how to sort of describe that place.
We first heard about the project from Bill, and we had some initial meetings with him and started talking about specifically the submission platform and what that could end up being. And at that point, you know, we looked at some of the early designs that Mark Tilsley had done, and Bill sort of wanted to start exploring different possibilities. How could we expand it while still remaining fairly true to Mark's original designs?
If you look at a lot of the art department, their early work, it's a lot of desks on a much clearer beach than what ended up in the movie. Sometimes there are mountains in the background. Sometimes they have doors opening with nothing outside, basically just bright light and people walking in.
We tried a few different things. Like, first of all, there were two sort of ideas that were a little bit out of the zone that we started exploring. The first of which, I thought it was a pretty interesting idea to maybe see a massive cloud of papers sort of floating over the entire environment, slowly sort of undulating around the environment as if there's potential leaks sort of floating above this world. But ultimately just felt like it was a little too on the nose for the idea and sort of betrayed the slightly more surrealistic nature of the scene. We also started exploring a much more kind of pared down version of the scene where there was almost just a void around them, mostly just completely black space with almost no definition and maybe just a little bit of hazy smoke floating up in the sky above them, kind of tying into the idea of like a very old 1940s newsroom and that sort of vibe. That scene was also a little bit interesting, but in the end it just felt like we were betraying like the coolness of what had been shot and it wasn't doing quite enough. The original design had desks, of which they shot 30 on set, but the desks would then extend in a line infinitely in 2 directions. And then in one early meeting, Bill said, what would it look like if the desks went infinitely in all directions?
So, we tried that out on a couple of frames. It worked, everybody really liked it, but that is a much different endeavor in terms of 3D, certainly, in terms of tracking. It just is much heavier technically.
This is a top-down view of what was required to expand from the 30 or so desks that were shot, which is, an area roughly this big. And then once we had to expand to infinity, all of a sudden, every little square you see is a desk. As soon as you add things off to the side, suddenly there are CG elements that are much closer than we had ever planned for in terms of CG assets, and especially people. So all of a sudden we need digital doubles to be relatively close to the camera on the sides. So it's just, all these new elements that come from a fairly simple request, but ultimately the idea was really working in design frame form, and it just became a challenge that we had to tackle and pull off. Our first introduction to the submission platform follows a piece of paper from sort of the void of ideas itself, and that sequence is being done by Prologue. So we're actually working with them to each do one half of the shot. So it sort of starts in this more very strange world of data and paper, and one paper does fly through, and we follow that and track with it. And then it goes into our shot, which has the paper flying over a bunch of desks. It's really Daniel's introduction to the notion of WikiLeaks coming in, but it's also our introduction to the idea of a visual metaphor of this world.
45, take 3.
The next sequence, we see Julian at a desk, and at that desk we pull back and eventually see that every desk is populated with Julian wearing slightly different clothes, but hard at work as every other entity within the company.
Action.
And that scene was all shot motion control with multiple passes to have as many Benedicts as we could. Eventually we had to duplicate them to expand in all directions, and there's a few digital Julians in there as well.
So no matter where they sat Benedict, the camera would be doing this exact same thing. So they would have him in the hero position, sort of close up, and they do one take that way. And then they'd have him in a different row towards the back and in a different outfit, doing something else.
A change of costume, please, my loves.
When we decided to extend the sides out, then we're looking at tons of elements that we kind of have to squeeze into this new vast landscape. So we're doing a lot of warping, sort of taking outtakes, really, after they yelled cut, okay, what can we use? What is he doing before he's looking straight at the camera that we can use here in a different spot? And does this perspective work? And hopefully you can't tell.
Eventually, Daniel has to stop Julian and destroy the submission platform.
And action.
That's the case where we mixed the practical lights with the CG lights, because obviously it's much better to retain that real light, the interaction, the sparks and everything moving around, and the smoke that the light generates. You have to deal with that because it's all traveling over Daniel.
Once Daniel's destroyed the entire submission platform, Julian then enters and sort of sees the remains of the submission platform. All the desks are gone and destroyed, and the critical element for that scene was, how does Julian feel when he's looking at all of this? Papers falling from the sky that are still burning, and that ties into the idea that all information is sort of inaccessible by him. Practically, there was a pass of embers falling that we used, but we ended up doing a simulation to create fiery elements and really get all the depth we needed around Benedict so that we could feel papers behind him and in front of him.
All the fiery little pieces that were falling through the air, I thought that did a lot to add to the sadness of the moment. And a lot of the time, as visual effects people, we work on things where if you've done it well, people are never going to know that you had any part of it, you know, and which is great. I mean, that's satisfying too, but it's nice to be able to work on something creative that is so important for the tone of the movie. And we're all movie people, you know, so it's exciting for us to be part of that process.